Madam Speaker. I have two questions to ask at the conclusion of this debate. First, how best do we develop democratic institutions in Egypt? And secondly, how do we regulate the behaviour of the army? To the first. The negative team in this debate were willing to trade off the short-term benefits of the legitimacy of an interim government against the long-term benefits of reforming power structures and incentives of actors within Egypt. But we also contested the affirmative team to demonstrate why the legitimacy that came as a result of supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood buying in to the new democratic system would be valuable. We told you that in the context of Egypt, a post-dictator state, but the most important thing that those people wanted was a legitimate democracy, that they wouldn't get the kind of legitimacy that they wanted. But even if it was true that the interim government would be seen as legitimate, what did we tell you? Well, firstly, we told you that the affirmative team's model wasn't then quite a coup, but what it did was grant legitimacy to the underlying power structures that facilitated that coup. We told you that ultimately that meant that the Muslim Brotherhood would be giving up the singularly most important tenet of their belief system, and that was that they ultimately valued genuine democracy. We told you that that was bad for a number of reasons. First, we told you it was bad because all it did was solidify the influence of ademocratic actors within democracy, and it legitimized their influence as a way of achieving power. And I'll go into the ways in which, and equally, it meant that it facilitated the army's direct ability to be able to facilitate future democracies in a way that was extremely pleasing towards it, and democracies that had the army at the centre of the political system and undermined and ultimately led to worse democracy. Ultimately, we said that there was a supervening value in terms of the functionality of government. And ultimately, what the affirmative team's model would do was it would undermine the ability of governments to function once it rewarded the ability of people to simply remove governments that displease them from being able to use particular ademocratic means to assert control over that government. We said that was bad in terms of establishing long-term democracy, where you needed people to buy into a political system whereby they would contest elections, not power. Ultimately, we also told you that this would likely lead to more extreme democracy within Egypt, as Muslim Brotherhood supporters left in droves towards more extreme people who are more willing to use power to actually contest elections. We also meant that it was more likely to just be seen as betraying a base that would mean that the Muslim Brotherhood would lose funding across the region and the legitimacy that was valuable in terms of establishing interest, buy-in from supporters into that democracy. But then we were told, in terms of the second question, that what we really needed to do under the affirmative team's model was try to co-opt the assertive and coercive military within Egypt. What we also told you was that we were happy to sacrifice that short-term engagement of the army if it meant that in the future we could have a roadmap to democracy that didn't involve them. We told you firstly that the democracy that would be produced at the hands of the army would have absolutely no buy-in, would have absolutely no concessions reached from the affirmative team, admitted as much when the affirmative team conceded that the Muslim Brotherhood can simply leave the interim government as soon as they want it. We think that was equally true we told you that was equally true for the army. We told you that a characterization of the army's underlying interests meant that they wouldn't sacrifice anything under the interim government, and they would continue to act as they always had in their own interests, and no degree of engagement with the interim government was going to change that. But secondly, we gave you a path to whereby the Muslim Brotherhood could continue to undermine the influence of the army by being able to engage the army on the level at which they cared about, and that was stability. But ongoing protests and ongoing pressure from the outside would force the army to continue to engage, and ultimately then co-opting with the army and agreeing to partake in a government by the army would solidify that control and ensure that no legitimate democracy in Egypt could ever exist. Because we told you that the affirmative team did not effectively regulate the behaviour of the army, and because we gave you the clearest path towards Egyptian democracy, the debate fell to the negative.
Thanks, Stephen. And now we have Richard returning to deliver the affirmative reply.
Madam Speaker, both sides in this debate thought that the Muslim Brotherhood had a legitimate role to play in an Egyptian democracy. The difference was we provided a roadmap for that. They just wanted to wish the Muslim Brotherhood back into democratic existence and wish away the military structures that underlie that democracy. I have two issues in reply. Firstly, what is better for the Muslim Brotherhood, and secondly, what was better for democracy in the Middle East. So firstly, to the Muslim Brotherhood. And what we told you was that the Muslim Brotherhood faced a crisis, because it was a crisis that would go to its very existence. They told us that the people who weren't protesting the people who weren't protesting in Egypt felt disenfranchised when we removed the Muslim Brotherhood from that government. But what we thought was that the continuing protests legitimised the army and the armies and secularists' position in taking out the Muslim Brotherhood. Moreover, we thought it legitimised attempts to try to disband that party and undermine that democracy. That was what would be more disenfranchising to these people, Madam Speaker. We think it's necessarily comparative. What we then told you was that the Muslim Brotherhood would be marginalised because it's not involved in writing those electoral laws and the constitution. That results in more disenfranchisement for those 40 million people that they wanted to protect, Madam Speaker. Then they said it's inconsistent for the Muslim Brotherhood to support this government as it reveals that they'll break their promises and sacrifice their goals. Again, we thought that this was an issue of comparing the harms. Under our model, the Muslim Brotherhood would get to participate to some extent. Under their model, they just hoped they would. They never provided us any reason to believe that anything would change. Then they said it reduced the ability of the Muslim Brotherhood to critique the government and stand up to the coup. We thought that there was nothing that would be more nothing that would reduce that ability more than being isolated from any power structures when you write the laws of that country and enforce the constitution. We thought that what we gave was the Muslim Brotherhood an ability to participate in that democracy and not be suppressed, because it was contingent on accepting the existence of the military, Madam Speaker. Then they said that the Muslim Brotherhood, accepting these positions, would buy into that underlying power structure that exists with the military. The problem was that you had to buy into that underlying power structure, or else you were going to get no change, Madam Speaker. This leads me to my second point, what is better for democracy in the Middle East. What they said was that the military control of democracy was bad in Egypt. We thought that that was probably true, but everything that they wanted to say was contingent on them proving that they could somehow reduce the power of the military. We don't think that they did that at all. What they said was that they would reduce the power because it would show the military cannot control stability within that nation. Why was that, Madam Speaker? We thought the military had been suppressing the Muslim Brotherhood for generations and probably could continue to. Moreover, it factored into the reasons that they didn't want to operate and function and cooperate with the Muslim Brotherhood in the first place, because it showed that they didn't accept the military and wouldn't cooperate. Then they said the institutions put in place by that puppet government would always be illegitimate, such as things that they're doing now, like writing more power for the military into the constitution. The problem is, when the Muslim Brotherhood was not participating in that democracy, there was nothing to stop that from happening, and there was no other voice within that party and that cabinet to try to undermine that ability, that attempt to get more military power in that government. Then what we told you then was that polarisation is bad for democracy, and this would lead to a polarisation of people. They said that people wouldn't accept the Muslim Brotherhood and would turn to other Islamist parties. What we thought, though, was that you get some buy-in from Islamists in that country, and it showed some cooperation that convinced people. Madam Speaker, we got better democracy, and we got better outcomes for the Muslim Brotherhood. We were proud to propose.
Thanks both teams for the debate. Can everyone start moving out as quickly as possible?